Good morning, everybody. We'll be getting started in a moment. Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our session on Can a review of your digital processes benefit your digital project? A guide to getting started. So quite a mouthful, but really what we're talking about is looking at business process reviews and process reviews in general. So just some etiquette before we get into the session. Just to say that this session is being recorded and it will be available on demand on the website afterwards. The Q&A box, as you'll see, is for any questions that you have for Chris or myself. And we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do put in your questions, as many questions as you want, and we will have some dedicated time to get through those later on in the session. There's also a chat box, and that's for any more sort of technical support issues or general queries. And my lovely colleague Rebecca is in the background, and she will be keeping an eye on those. So I'm Joyce Harman. I'm Senior Client Relationship Manager at Hart Square, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by my colleague Chris Gilbert. Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Really pleased to be here. So I am Head of Technology and Services at Hart Square. I've been in the charity space for 20 years, I think. Scary is to say that out loud. And I've been a consultant, managed projects, done a lot of business process reviews through that time. So really looking forward to having a chat about it.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And, really for today, we want this as an opportunity. Chris might not like me to say this. An opportunity to pick his brains. He knows a lot about this topic. So put in your questions and we'll make sure, see if we can put him on the spot on it. So for those of you who are not aware of Hart Square, just to say that we are an independent consultancy practice and we work only in the not-for-profit sector. And, although we do know lots of technology partners and technologies really, really well, that impartiality is really important to us. So I want to run a quick poll, so if you just bear with me while I bring this up. And what we are asking is, what stage are you currently at? So just to give us a bit of idea of who's with us this morning and kind of what stage you are thinking about processes. So are you looking to get more information about how to do process reviews? Are you about to start a process review yourself? Or actually you've done some business process reviews, but you really don't know what the next step should be. So I'll just give that a few more seconds, but at the minute it's definitely seeking more information seems to be the main one coming in. So let me just end the poll and I will share the results. So yes, absolutely. 75% of you are looking for more information or knowledge on how to go about thinking about processes. There's then next a couple of you, about 70%, you're about to start looking at your processes. And then interestingly, about 8% of you have already, reviewed your processes, but you're not sure what to do next. So I think that's really quite interesting. So Chris, I think, good for us when we come to the interview with you, really a lot of people on the call today are looking for information and some of those good sort of tips on how to go about. So I'm going to stop sharing. So really what I want to do is go through it on a very, very high level, just some sort of key points to think about, and really setting the scene for when we bring Chris in. So, really thinking about, what is a business process review? What is the purpose of a business process review, or a BPR that I'll refer to a lot through the rest of the session? Really what you're looking to do is to identify any gaps or inefficiencies in the current processes that you have. Because really what you're looking to do is look for potential areas that you can maybe streamline some of the processes that you currently have. Could you actually automate some of the processes that you have, either making some changes on the technology that you currently have or by bringing in a new system? Or it might be that, lots of departments or teams are working in silos and they're very much like, this is my information and I don't share it out with other people and it's not all joined up. So as an example, say Chris has some more examples to talk through later, but as a really basic example, Lots of organisations at the moment, and I've lots of organisations I'm talking to, seems to be funding time. It's funding request time and it's funding reporting time. So for those of you, who have to do that, that there is an awful lot of information that you need to provide either through your funding application or through your funding reporting, looking at things like demographic information, types of people that you're working with, and what kind of interactions have they had with you? Have they been doing training with you? Have you been giving them support? What kind of support have you been giving them? Have they been coming to events? All of this kind of information, is required to report back against the funding. Really thinking about the impact that you are making using the funding that you have. And so it can be a case of, in order to generate these reports or to generate your funding request to get this information, it's really difficult because some data might be, say, with your marketing team, some data might be with your training team, some data might be with your support team. Again, it depends what you do in an organization. And actually, in order to do the funding report, it can take weeks and weeks because everything's spreadsheets, the system's not joined up, and it's a really, really laborious and very stressful. And I do know from some people I've been talking to lately, it's a really, really stressful process. So what you're looking to do is there actually something that can be done about bringing the data on board onto a system, joining up those processes? Is the process just not working? Where is the process broken? So it's a very basic level example, and Chris has got some other ones to talk through later. What you're also trying to do is identify some quick wins. And what we just mean by that is things that could be changed now. And again, a really basic example, although some people will say it's not that quick a win, is if you have, for example, a database CRM system in place, and it's a good one, and in theory it's been set up properly, but people are still working off on their own spreadsheets because they're used to doing it that way. By saying no longer spreadsheets have to go, everybody has to work off the system. That will then mean that your data is all in one place. But it's about looking at what things can be done that don't involve major changes to the technology, major spends, major structural changes to how the teams, departments, and things run and manage processes. And you're looking to identify strategic decisions that might be needed to bring about some improvements. So that might be things like changing technology. It might be things in a fundamental change in your processes, but there also might be a change management strand that needs to be looked at, how people are working and challenges that they're facing. So thinking about the value, why would you go to all of this effort to do BPR? And I really break this into three areas, and I think Chris will expand on this a lot more, but it's very much about thinking about defining the as-is state. Now, if you've ever talked to anybody about business processes, you'll hear a lot of talk about as-is, and people often say, what does that mean? And really that is, where are you now? How are you doing things currently? And so by running a series of workshops with teams to understand, what are the processes they're following, putting together clear process maps of how it's working, how things fit together, diagrams to show what the inputs and outputs are. So, you can look at doing that full, very detailed business process review, but there is also an option to look at business process assessment. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be asking and talk about in a bit more detail later. Then quick wins and recommendations. So as I said before, this is what can be addressed now. What is not going to be a huge change? What is something that can be easily done now? Or what is it that is going to need to wait until you've either updated your technology or have changed your technology? The stuff that is a longer roadmap around it. Often, as well as doing this, is to understand, is there some bigger strategic decisions or strategic changes that need to be made organizational wide that involve a lot more discussion and a lot more planning and a lot more thinking? So it's really about putting together what can we do now and what are the things that we need to focus on going forward. And then looking at risk mitigation and business as usual planning. So doing this exercise is really useful. So you're putting together your as is, and what you're looking to get to is your to be. And all in essence that means is your future state. What would you like to look like? What is it kind of really your end goal? If you are going out to market for a new system, new technology, this is a really useful exercise to go through because it provides partners to understand, what your current processes are and the challenges around them. And it's also really, really useful when focusing on, scoping workshops and helping you with decision making. So then finally, before I bring Chris in, when you're going through this process reviews, um, it's some sort of key things to think about, some key questions or items really to identify. So, do we have our processes documented? That's kind of a fundamental, might sound a basic question, but a fundamental question. But importantly, who owns them? Because there's no point having processes if nobody's responsible for keeping them up to date or making sure that people are following them. So who owns them? And equally then follows on to then when was the last time they're reviewed? Because you might have put these processes in years ago, but if nobody's ever looked at them again to see, are they working? Do we need to change them? So when was the last time they were reviewed? How is data being shared between the different departments? Is data properly being shared between the different departments? What tools and systems are people using? Are they working for them? Are they not working for them? An interesting one as always for me is understanding have you created your own manual processes, asking teams, are they working, off system? Again, different processes. Have they done that? What have they done? So you've got an understanding of any sort of off different processes that are being put in place. What are the manual workarounds that people have found? What are the blockers that you're facing? And don't forget about people. People is really important in all of this. It's not just about technology. And then a really important question for me is, how long are the current processes taking to be carried out? Are there some processes that are taking days and days? Are there some processes that could be taking weeks? Or are they, what are the ones that are being done in a timely manner? Because if you're looking at processes and some of them are taking, days to do, then obviously there's something there that needs to be looked at. So now I'm going to bring Chris in. So Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your role at Hart Square?
Sure. So as the kind of the long job title sort of covers, really technology and services are the two areas that myself and my colleague Reese cover. So we look at both the technology space, new technologies, developing technologies. Obviously we don't have our own, so we can kind of look very, very widely and understand which areas are developing, which of the technology partners that we are aware of, what they're doing, also any new ones that we haven't seen or spoken to before. But on the other side, it's really about how we deliver services internally and externally. So what we do, how we do it, how we keep refining those and making sure that they are as beneficial as they can be ultimately.
Perfect. No wonder you're so busy all the time. Doing lots of things. So, what for you do you see as the biggest challenge you find that clients have when they're thinking about embarking on a digital project, CRM or website? What do you see?
I think in a lot of cases it's probably everybody being clear about what the outcomes are, the expected outcomes, what are the benefits going to be. I think it's tied in really closely with the work around business process, because I think there's often a hope or an expectation that a system or a solution is going to solve business process issues. And I think in some ways setting those expectations and maybe understanding that's not the case, that's actually a really good starting point. If you don't have that and people's expectations are that it will cure all problems and it will be the thing that sort of resolves long-standing issues, then it's going to be a disappointment, or it's going to run along as a project a lot longer than expected. And even if you do get to that endpoint, it's probably going to cost in people's energy, in time and money, really, ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it is that point as well about the people that as well, not to be forgotten about in all of this as well. Just quickly, today I know that we're having some problems with my sound coming through a bit crackly at the start, but hopefully I think that's stabilized now. So sorry about that. So what do you, I've really touched on some very high level on sort of the benefits of carrying out a BPR, but for you, what do you see as, as the benefits of carrying one out?
I mean, really, the idea of tying them to a project, technology project, it does have some benefits, but really what we're talking about is ultimately it's the day-to-day for everyone. So if you don't know what your processes are in a way that you can pass them on to other people, you can assess them and refine them, you've got that traditional kind of risk of somebody saying, oh, I've got all the I've got all the processes all in my head, or I kind of, we just know what we're doing, and it really doesn't give you any way to build on that knowledge, on the ways that people are working, or assess anything. So I think for me, the business process review, as a distinct piece of work, it's a chance to sort of reset people's expectations. It's a chance to flush out some things which you may never have even considered, because you've never had a conversation that's focused in that area. It's the day-to-day is always swirling around, and this is the first chance you've had to sort of take people away from that, but then to kind of reflect on it and say, okay, this is what I do. Do you do that? Is that what I should be doing? So from a kind of almost a non-project perspective, I think it has a massive value. And then within a project, obviously it can be the basis for almost everything you do within that project. It helps to validate your requirements that you're gathering for the piece of technology you're looking to implement. It gives you talking points. It gives technology partners a basis to sort of look at how you work and what you do, where they can help support that, where they can't, and that it's not the technology's responsibility, but there is a kind of greater need, all the way through to supporting testing, how you're going to test, what you're going to test, and then into going live, and then hopefully embedding new refined processes that then are adhered to, and then that impacts the thing like you'd spoken about earlier, about the example of data, just being recorded and used in an appropriate way, in an agreed, consistent way, so that when you do report, when you do analyze anything, that nobody's questioning whether it was updated or inputted in the first place in the right way. Things aren't missed, and you haven't got any gaps.
No, I mean, that's all really useful and perfect. I think that the data point, yeah, absolutely is really important, because very often in conversations with people, what biggest issue is they don't trust the data.
Yeah.
So it's getting to the fact that you can say, no, we've reviewed all this. We can trust the data because of all the work that we've done, on the processes. So I think, yeah, that's a really good point. So how do you decide? And $50 million question. So how can you decide if you need to or if you should carry out?
It's a bit of maybe a bit of a flippant answer, but I would say if you asked yourself the question of, do we have our business processes recorded? Do we have them, mapped somewhere? If the answer is anything but yes, then you do need to do that work. I mean, that's I don't think you're not going to benefit from it as a piece of work, but I think particularly if you've got a project that's coming up which is obviously related to those particular areas, you absolutely have to make sure that those are not only documented and taken out of people's kind of heads and written down in some form, but also that they're up to date. There's no real benefit in if you have processes but you don't have people that who'd owned them, that you can identify and say, okay, that's your team's set of processes. When were they last updated? Well, they were last updated 2 years ago. It's thinking about the last 2 years, then the world has changed massively in that time. There's a very good chance that little kind of workarounds and all sort of additional processes have taken shape, or equally that some things have just not been done. People forget, naturally there's something that's pressing, you don't do something for a little while, it doesn't become part of then your day-to-day, and then it's lost, and then there are gaps that start appearing from there. So really, it was interesting with the poll results, but I think if that's the first question that you can ask yourself, if it's if it sort of is something you can reflect on, I would say that almost, I can't think of many clients that we work with where it would not benefit them to review at least certain areas within their organizations as a starting point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I suppose, just expanding that a bit, could it be done that you might decide we just can't do full organizational wide at this stage, that it could be done by department? So can it be kind of broken up into different areas or stages?
Yeah, I think one of the keys with doing it is that you have to make it, you have to cut your cloth really. You have to make it appropriate to the resources that you have, it's time intensive, and also the value that you're looking to get. Not all processes are equal in the nicest possible sense. Some are, even if they're relevant for a certain project, do you need to cover them? Do you need to have a session that focuses on them right now? Do you need something that's got diagrams? Do you need something that's got a supporting document to kind of draw out those quick wins and the other things that you've got around them? Some things are just very functional, and so you're absolutely right. I mean, you shouldn't. I think my perspective is that if you're going to do it in the areas where it's going to have the most impact, and then hopefully if it proves the benefit of doing it, then the other areas can happen following that. But you can at least prove that you're able to do it, find an approach that works, and then you can kind of roll it out further from there.
Perfect. Yeah, which follows on nicely to my next question is, so what is the difference between a business process review and a business process assessment?
So BPR and BPA, I mean, we sort of came about with these terms. I remember us having conversations about how to differentiate between the different approaches, really. So business process review, I think in a Hart Square world is really, it's a root and branch approach. So it's almost every team, every department would that would be relevant, say, to a project, would be taken through a series of workshops. You would be mapping all the processes. You probably map all of the processes. You would have quite a significant amount of collateral with it as well. So you would treat almost every team and process within it equitably and give all of it the same amount of attention. So it's scale wise, it's kind of the biggest piece of work that you could probably do with process review. A BPA, I suppose we use that term to differentiate between that kind of wholesale approach and then something that was a bit more focused. So what we just we're talking around, where you do a much higher level review. First of all, you do a sort of an initial scoping of the kinds of processes that you have. It's almost collating core pieces of information around what processes do we have, who owns them, are they documented, if so, where, how significant are they, or how related are they to, say, the project you're about to do. And then from there you essentially almost rag rate them, and you look at the ones where there are gaps. If it doesn't have an owner, if we don't have it documented and it needs to be part of our new project, we have to put that at the top of the queue to then have a session that goes into a deeper dive and documents then the process and creates flow diagrams, things like that. So it's just an approach which hopefully balances out time and benefit, really, with those two.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And just to thank you for having some great questions coming in, which we'll be getting later. So please, you have to put in plenty of questions, and we will get to them later. So looking around, I highlighted some, very high level questions and to be asked when doing a BPR. But for you, what are the questions that you should be asking when developing or carrying out a BPR?
I think you've got to make sure the sessions are framed in the right way to begin with. So I think making sure people are prepped for what they can expect in those sessions is really important. The question why, I think, is probably one of the most consistent that I would ask. Why do you do that? What's the purpose of it? Why does that need to happen at that point? Just to try and flush out really the sometimes things that aren't really that well considered, or that could end up being those things that you then reflect on and say as a quick win. As soon as you start asking those questions, you also tend to get a lot of questions of, well, we've just always done it like that. So I can think of examples where I worked on a project where we were doing a session and there was a huge process of constantly printing out pieces of paper. We entered it onto a system, then we printed out a copy, then we put it in a file. Why do we do that? Nobody could really tell. It was just something that was done almost before they had a system to do it. So it just become ingrained in the process, and they had these massive kind of vaults of paperwork nobody ever looked at, but it had just come from there. So I think asking the question why throughout and making people aware that that's perfectly okay. Also, I think trying to ask the questions and agree a level of detail. So it's an appropriate, again, an appropriate approach that you're taking. You're not, are you trying to get down to almost creating a user manual, you know, of I click on this thing, or I do this, and I you know, I open this file and I save it here. I would say it's probably too much detail. I think that you almost need to agree that it's a level above that. We probably refer to it as almost like a medium level of detail, where what you're considering is, what do you want to get out of this at the end? Do you want to be able to see where different people are interacting within a process, key steps in the process, but not dive down into so much detail that you end up, you know, spending vast amounts of time in those sessions and essentially don't make as much progress as you should be doing, really.
Perfect. And sorry, just we had a clarifying point come in. They missed it to say, what is the A in a BPA? So it's a business process assessment. So the A stands for assessment. Perfect. Thank you, Chris. So if you're embarking on implementing, you know, new technology, what would be the ideal time, you know, to carry out a BPR? You know, should it be before you do the requirements or at the implementation phase? I know you touched on a little bit, but it's always one of the questions that we get asked: when is the right time to do it? So yeah, interested on your views on that one.
It's in some ways it's an unpopular answer, which is that it should be really done before you start doing your requirements gathering, or it should be done as part of that, really, if you want to get the most out of the outputs. But part of the challenge, I think, with a business process review or assessment, whatever you're doing, is that it can often feel like it's getting in the way of other work. So actually it's kind of like, we'd rather just document the requirements, and can't we just get on to do that? You can do that, but ideally, if you think about what that information will help you to inform sort of future stages of work, if it helps you define more clearly your priority requirements, because you could see a process and say, we have to improve these elements of it, it will then allow you to prioritize those requirements and then tender for a technology and a technology partner, knowing that those are the kind of critical things that you want to address. You can then provide those to the partner as part of that process, so then they can actually see where you're currently, you know, what your world looks like, and say how they can support that, hopefully, and add additional improvements in there. And then what it allows you to do, not only using it for those things that we talked about before a little around user acceptance testing, you know, it's much easier to follow a process against a system, rather than, again, trying to think of that at the top of your head and maybe write scripts or do things kind of completely in the moment to try and test whether it's doing what it should do. But if you have them at the beginning as kind of as is processes, as the state is right now, and try and avoid solutionizing and coming up with like what the new one, not the new thing, looks like, then you have a template to be able to do the kind of to be state when you're getting to the point of going live. So you've actually, you're doing less work really overall, because like I said before, the technology isn't going to solve internal business process. You know, why do we do something at this point? The system won't necessarily give you any indication of that. You can record a piece of information, or you can update a record, or do something at any point. Why do we do it at the stages that we do? If you got the as is, then you can so much more easily then tweak those and then say, well, this is now how we expect our processes to work, and we've got something then to assess against when we've gone live ultimately.
That's perfect. Just one thought I had on that. Very often, one of the things that people will sort of say is the reason they don't want to do them at the start is because there's a danger of taking the bad processes into the new system. What do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, you've kind of covered it, but I was just thinking while you were speaking.
Yeah, I suppose it's how you frame the outputs of those. If you're absolutely, if you're providing them to anyone and saying this is what we want, I think that's very different. You will get ultimately then more of the same. But I think if you can explain them as being, this is currently how we work, we want to improve those things, and your tendering process, you know, whether that's the document or the meetings you're having, you should then be able to reflect on those and just reiterate that, you know, that's that's not necessarily the most efficient way that we would want to work, or there are things in here which you can see are very manual or multiple steps. Can we improve that? I think it's unlikely that a partner will not look at those and think, oh, actually there's opportunity here that we've done this, X number of times over with other people. You could definitely streamline that. We can definitely take out 5 steps, or reduce the amount of work that you need to do. But it also is useful in that it highlights, if you do consider how long a process takes, broadly, and not thinking of kind of calculating it by minutes and hours, but just in terms of elapsed time. If something takes you 2 weeks kind of from end to end to kind of get something resolved or updated, it's a really good marker that you can assess then when you are testing, because you've got something to say, okay, what within the process that's changed has improved? Is this quicker? Is this less manual work? Does it give us more time back to do other things that are more valuable?
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you very much. So how do you unpick this question that comes up all the time? How do you unpick the difference between a real problem that needs to be solved with a process versus people just, not currently following processes?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's I think coming back to that point around asking people why, and even just asking people to describe a process. I vividly remember a session I did once where 2 people that worked in the same team, in an events team, did exactly the same job, worked, literally sat next to each other every day, doing their roles. And when we were talking about the process and saying, how do you do this, is for event management, how do you onboard somebody? When do you send them packs of information? When do you get them a running vest? And they described 2 completely different processes at different stages, and they were looking at each other and saying, why do you do that now? Oh, I don't do that. I've never done that. So I think that's going to knock things to the top of the queue in terms of both things that you need to review and address. I mean, that can come down to both there not being a clear process and people not following the process. But the key, I think, the earliest opportunity is to make it clear that it's not, in you doing those sessions, you're not trying to catch anybody out. You're not trying to pin somebody down as to sort of, oh, you haven't been doing what you were supposed to do. It's just, we need to do this in order to make sure that we're working efficiently. And most of that stuff rises kind of to the top of the conversations as you're doing them, as you're getting people to talk through. And it's why it's important as well to make sure that when you do those sessions, you have some form of documentation off the back of them that then gets circulated around for people to review, because that also stimulates then bits. It might be something they've forgotten to mention or something you've not captured properly. So don't waste your time almost on an area which you might think this is a real problem. It could have just been that somebody misspoke, or it could have been that the understanding you took from that was not quite aligned with what actually somebody was trying to explain. So yeah, it should be relatively easy once you start documenting them, and if you take a consistent approach to work out where people aren't following something versus where a process doesn't hang together, doesn't really exist.
Yeah, perfect. I love that example. I mean, it'd be surprising how common that is.
Yeah.
2 people doing the same role but doing it completely differently. Still
Absolutely.
both of them still getting stuff done. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, but not in the same way. And a question that I definitely get asked this an awful lot is, your incumbent technology provider, be it CRM or whatever it is, should they be involved in that stage when you're doing the BPR? So you're not your potential new partners, your incumbent, your partner you're working with currently.
Yeah, I kind of struggle, I suppose, to not make this sound like you're sort of cutting them out of something, but I think it's probably just thinking about what the mindset is with a technology partner is likely to be with a technology partner, that they're likely to be thinking of a technology solution. So a process that may actually that they might talk through. There could be a danger that they start to talk about how your process should fit their solution. And that might be the right way around, or it might be the wrong way around, but it also too system focused, whereas what we're really focusing on when we're talking about business process is that it's more wide ranging than that. It might be a process that dips into a system or multiple systems at various points, comes back out of it, and is about people having a meeting or a some sort of escalation or whatever it might be. So I'm probably I'd err on the side of maybe less so in the as is kind of assessment, but maybe more so in helping you to kind of work out the to be elements. It's a toss-up, I suppose, between leveraging maybe skill sets they might have. It might be something that they do as part of the way that they do discovery, that they look at process. But I think we tend to see a lot of technology partners that wouldn't go into, they either wouldn't get into the detail of the process itself, or if they do, they won't get into it and then provide you with an output from it. So, if you have an expectation that they're going to provide you with, flow charts and diagrams and a write-up afterwards, it's very unlikely. It's more likely that they're talking through that particular process to sort of say, okay, you need to do these things. Great, we'll make the system able to do those things, but not really when you should be doing them, and how that then plays out for consistency of usage and data and all of those kind of knock-on benefits that you should be getting from a process review.
Perfect, thank you. And so we've had great questions coming in, so keep those coming in, which we'll get to them in a minute. So finally on these ones, Chris, so from your experience in the sector, are there any key tips that you would give to organizations thinking about doing this review of their processes? Any kind of key takeaways?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that we're probably sort of circling back to a little bit that we referenced before. So I think definitely agreeing your approach. Are you going for that kind of organization-wide review? Is this a sort of a moment in time where you think we just have to get this work done because we've never done it before, or we've left it too long, and we really have to do a kind of a full piece of work? Or do we need to just focus into certain key areas where either we're seeing problems, we just know something's not efficient, or there's a lot of complaints about the amount of time certain things take? So I think defining that first of all would be critical, and then it gives you a sense of, okay, what do you do from there onwards? I think agreeing that what you're trying to create as an output, if you are looking at process, again, the kind of medium level, you're not trying to create a user manual off the back of these sessions that you're running. You're hopefully trying to create a kind of a sense of the flow of information, the flow of the process, a supporting document that you can easily maintain, which just talks to some of those quick wins or those bigger policy related changes. We talk about strategic decisions and things. We could improve this massively, but actually it's not a decision that a team could make just to stop doing something or do something differently. So it's about scale, I think, would be my main one. And then also think about the way that you want to go about doing the sessions. If you're remote, do you want to use a process flow online tool like there's Miro or SmartDraw? I mean, there are a lot of available ones out there. Visio, obviously, and most of them come with an element of cost, but there are some you can use largely for free. Do you want to put the pressure on yourselves to almost draw those out in real time with people, which online is pressure, but it can be much more interesting and obviously more relevant if to be able to see something build and kind of sense check as you go through. Or if you're going to do that in person, post-it notes are everybody's friend with process work, so being able to kind of stick things up and move it around a board and draw kind of connecting lines. So just thinking about what you're going to use as your kind of your tool to be able to start looking at those processes. And then from there, you can work out whether you write them up, whether you redraw them in something else, or whether taking a photo is enough of them just to be able to have that, and then a document that kind of supports it to sort of extract those quick wins and those other decisions or other sort of key elements that you'd look at. And the final one, I think, just to reiterate, is always circulate those write-ups or those diagrams or whatever they are back to the people that were in those sessions, just because it will. I can't think of a workshop I've ever run where doing that doesn't end up having people come back with, oh, I forgot an entire process. In some cases, there's a whole other aspect to my role that's related to that thing, but it just didn't spring to mind. We didn't kind of talk it through. That's really important. So it's a good way to both show people that have taken part that there's been a benefit to them playing a role, and it's, you know, it's a good thing for kind of sense checking that work, but it does also have a definite benefit in flushing out any things that might have been missed.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. We've got some great questions coming in. So the first one for you, Chris, is what do you think is key in bringing people on board with new processes and effectively transitioning from old systems, for example, keeping data in Excel, to new systems, keeping data in the CRM? How to avoid defaulting back to old ways of working once the new process has been rolled out?
Great question, and not probably the toughest thing about business process, I think, is implementing then the new world. So I think, again, making sure that you have a to-be version of what you created in the first instance, I think is critical, because if you don't have that, how do you hold that up against any of the ways that people are working and say, well, we have that documented, it's very clear how we should be working. In some ways, it's easier with a system and a system change, because what you can do is you can think about the kind of internal reports and queries that you could run to make sure that information is being inputted at the right time, that you can make that part of a kind of an ongoing check-in on data quality, and essentially what you're doing is checking that process is being followed. So to think about what are the ways in which you can monitor that is really important. It also comes down to the nuts and bolts of decommissioning spreadsheets, you know, kind of locking them away, preferably probably deleting them or archiving them in some form, but certainly saying that they live here currently, and when we go live they will no longer live there, and if they go anywhere they'll be read only, and, you know, only available for a short period of time, at which point we'll get rid of them. On the change management aspect of it, I think it's also about trying to make sure that you give time to thinking about why people have those concerns. You know, it's easy to say this is the new process, follow it, but sometimes it might be that you've actually in documenting a process, you've missed out something that's a sort of an underlying principle within that process, that it might be that it gives a certain amount of thinking time to one stage to another, or it's required because it's, you know, it's something that needs face-to-face interaction, and it's simply just having a process means that goes, you miss some sort of benefits of the process as it stands. So thinking very carefully about what that reluctance relates to, and then thinking about, could that just be that you're, you know, scared of the new technology? Could it be that your training hasn't been good enough, you know, to kind of make sure people are onboarded? So I think it's just trying to think about it from quite a few different angles, and then again measuring and reviewing that process as part of the project, rather than you going live and then the whole thing's done and we're back to working as we always have done. Trying to think to yourself, okay, we need to put some markers and some milestones in to have a check-in on these things.
Yeah, perfect. Next question is, what stakeholders or colleagues should we consult when carrying out a review?
Yeah, another really good one. So I think certainly avoiding just having kind of everybody in the room is key, and it's a reason why it's a good question as well. So I think you need people that I would say for business process, the doers in the nicest possible sense. I think if you have any more senior people, you have to consider whether they are going to make people more cautious about talking about their process, because they might think, I'm not sure we have one, or it's very ad hoc, and actually saying that out loud feels like I might get in trouble for it. So again, thinking about who can give you the information that you need as to how things actually work, versus you might still need some more senior people or managers in those sessions who hear some of this stuff for the first time potentially, or understand what's being talked through, and kind of maybe agree with them beforehand that they're going to play less of an active role, than the people that are describing things, so that you've got an approach which allows people to talk through what's happening right now, how they do things, and not feel like they're being judged or jumped on the moment that something, you know, is being done that shouldn't be, or has not been previously agreed to, or falls out of the process. So I think carefully assessing that. I would say if you can, depending on the size of the organization, probably more than 6 or 7 people in one of those sessions is too much. You know, once you're getting kind of 10 and upwards, you're going to have people that either say nothing or feel that they can't really contribute, or somebody that will take the lead role and everybody sort of sits back. So trying to keep the numbers sensible and relevant, again, against people that have the knowledge, would probably be my recommendation on that.
Perfect. And actually, that goes on really nicely to another question that's come in, which is around skills. So what skills does somebody need to do the review, or what role would typically fall under? And I'm thinking as well, to your point about people who, you know, having too many people, but people sitting and not contributing. So yeah, what sort of, you know, skills do people need to carry out reviews?
I think so. I think somebody that's got good kind of social skills in a way, because a lot of it is about trying to pull on little bits of threads of conversation and trying to kind of pull out pieces of information from members of your team. So I think you need to have, you know, if you're focused purely on very technical detail, then I think it sometimes can change the dynamic in the session. So you don't necessarily need a technical skill set to understand a system, because ultimately we're trying to keep away from that level of detail. You need to have an approach that's consistent, a way of running those sessions that's agreed and consistent as well. But it's an interesting one. It's why I think sometimes when you have you know, have to say you know, the CRM manager could run your business process review workshops, but if their focus is entirely on the CRM, then their conversation could go down a route where you don't really see the bigger picture. You see a very niche part of a process and you go into loads of detail there, but actually it doesn't link things together. So I think it's a skill set to make sure that you have the right focus, that you keep people engaged, and that you can do that whilst obviously documenting some of this stuff. It's you know, you can obviously, with the benefit of Teams and Zoom, you can record a session online, but being in a room and trying to kind of coordinate all of those things, you need something that's kind of well versed and ideally got some experience in it. But that, I wouldn't say that that's enough of a reason to not try and embark on it yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I really like your point as well, that you don't have to be technical.
Yeah.
And equally, possibly just the CRM manager, because their focus is obviously going to be on the CRM. I think that's a really good point as well. Another question that's come in is, we've never carried out a review like this before. So any tips on how to sell the benefits, you know, of carrying this out internally to senior management team, the board of trustees, as well as those who would be tasked doing it when they've never done it before. So really, you know, I suppose getting buy-in for the benefit of doing it.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of the common challenge of trying to certainly almost sell it in-house before being able to take part in a technology project as well. It's that point about it almost seeing like it's slowing things down, or it's a bit of a blocker. I think you need to think about the risks. I think risk is obviously usually for senior teams is something that most don't want to hear about, you know, or don't want to feel that you are taking risks. So I think if you've got the need to explain that there are potentially inefficiencies in the way that you work, you can't assess whether you are working as efficiently as you can be. You could potentially waste time and money if you're going into a project by, you know, essentially just doing more of the same, to your point about, you know, the process sort of approach, and almost just doing more of the same, coming out with the same outcomes. So I think trying to make sure that it's understood as an existing ongoing risk. You can't deny that if people only know things in their head, people will leave, people, you know, will be off with sicknesses and things like that. That's the nature of, you know, work in general. And can you as an organization sit there and say, well, we're okay with that, which I think would be crazy to think that you would have anybody willing to say, yes, that's absolutely fine, we take that risk on. But it also is, if it's going to do anything with a project, it's got to be the platform that you're building that project on. It's got to be the thing that you're aiming for benefits to come from. So are we spending too much time on things that are process related but not really actual beneficial? They're taking time away from the things that we want to spend time on, that we've got smart people that have got knowledge and experience that we'd much rather leverage from them on a certain aspect of what they do, rather than them spending time messing around with this convoluted system that we've created and these processes that everybody is trying their best to follow. So I think, I don't know about you, Joyce. I mean, I certainly would not underplay the risks and the potential impact of those risks, or the benefits that you could get from doing a process review, the critical need to do it. You could even, you think about something like GDPR. If you don't know your process around GDPR, you are liable to be fined. You're liable to have your reputation in the papers. Those kinds of risks are vast and long term. I'm sure we can all think of charities that we've seen that have been in the press at various stages over data breaches and things like that. A lot of those come from processes that are never defined, or are defined but not closely monitored and ensure that they work. So I think that if you just look at some of those basic examples, you can see the importance of having them.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and absolutely on the GDPR side, it won't be taken, if you have a breach, it won't be taken as an excuse to say, well, we haven't actually looked at our process for years, or we haven't got them documented. And
I
actually,
think probably count more against you in a sense if you said that. I think
absolutely, it definitely will. They will not take that as an excuse, because it isn't an excuse. It isn't an acceptable excuse, and it is also, I think definitely there's a lot of the conversations I have with people is, it is that data management and explaining to the SMT and even the board trustees, we've got to get control of this data. And that, even if just for one point, that can be a fundamental thing of the reason to do this. But as you say, also absolutely thinking about their staff, their pressures, their how they're working, because ultimately, yes, you're working to support, your members, your clients that are working with you, but you have to think about your staff as well. You have to think about their welfare. It's really important. Conscious of time, I'm just going to go over one or two other really quick questions. So you kind of covered this already, but so you're saying we're considering doing a business case for new tech. So how does business process review fit into the project life cycle when it's done? When should you do it? I suppose really to kind of, you've kind of answered already, but to reframe it slightly. If an organization, because I get asked a lot, if an organization has made the decision, we're going to change our system, will they argue, and can they argue, well, we don't need to look at the reviews because we're going to change everything in the new system?
I guess you can, and I suppose it's understanding the implications of that position that you take. I think if you're tying business process entirely to a system, then you are missing out on a lot of the process that's likely to sit outside of the system. So there would be an argument that I would probably make, which is to say, just because the system is in process of being embedded, I think you've still got process that needs to be understood and agreed as it currently stands, because obviously an implementation might take you 6 weeks, it might take you 2 years, so it's a long time that you'll still be doing your day-to-day before you potentially go live. So I think it's weighing up then, is there a benefit and the need to do the kind of the as-is assessment, or do we just need to actually focus on what we are moving towards and do a kind of more of a look at, okay, what are our expectations of how we will work going forwards? Because I agree, I mean, there's no value if you're about to go live in doing a load of process maps for things that you're not going to do in the same way anymore. So I think it's thinking about where you are in your process, but also just being realistic that, again, if you get too caught up in it being about the system, you will miss out on all of the other kind of general day-to-day, BAU processes which are connected to and relate to all of those different things with the system, but aren't entirely the system's responsibility or directly related to it.
Perfect. And one really quick last question, which you're going to say to me is not a quick answer, but I'll frame it in because it's the question is, once we've carried out a review, what's next? What does this lead to? Now, I suppose I'm going to say, so that you don't say afterwards, why did you ask such a long question, is I suppose the bit for me is making sure that this isn't shelfware. Do it and it kind of sits there and you don't do anything with it. Kind of your kind of thoughts on, what can it lead to? I know there's many options, but kind of a quick of what could it lead to?
No, and that's a really good point about it not just becoming something that gathers dust, because there is that danger, absolutely. If you write a 30-page report for every single business process that you've covered or each department, nobody will read it. So it's about making sure that you can extract from, if you just think of it as almost two outputs, you think of it as a process flow diagram, some form of kind of visual aid to say we do these things in these ways. When you then sit back from that and review that, to have something that it could be an Excel or Word document, but that lists out some of the things that strike you as being very obvious things that could be improved straight away, quick wins, which don't need necessarily, might not need any kind of sign off or any kind of system change or anything like that. Could just be, let's just stop doing that, or let's just tweak that so we don't do that there, we do it somewhere else. So it would be reflections on those quick wins, considerations of then the wider policy type changes or strategic decisions that might be needed that could maybe significantly change and improve a process or streamline it, but needs that kind of it might need a presentation in its own right for that one particular change. But having something that allows you then to track what you've assessed, and that you have a way to understand whether you're going to apply it now, or as you mentioned, I think earlier, do you make that as part of, say, a technology project where it's going to be addressed with that new technology, that new partner, and you kind of park it for that, but you absolutely track it back when you're going through that implementation to say, have we addressed that particular issue? Can we test it? Can we roll that out as being the new way that we would do things? So it's got to have value. If you're going to do it and then just stick it in on a server in a folder somewhere, you've already made the process, which is likely to be forgotten and not followed.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think sums it up really nicely. There has to be value to it. There's no point in doing this unless there's going to be value to it. Which takes us up to time. So we've had lots of other questions, unfortunately, we haven't been able to cover, but please do get in touch and we're happy to answer any of the ones that we didn't get a chance to cover. But it really is just to say, Chris, thank you so much. Some really, really, really useful insights, and so we can talk about it all day long, but we have to keep our project manager head on and make sure we finish on time. So just to say thank you so much, Chris, for joining us, and obviously thank you so much for you on the session today, for joining us and for your great questions that have been coming in. So thank you for everybody, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much, Joyce.